Hello, everyone. My name is Ayele Adjavan. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at the San Francisco chapter of PRSA. The Diversity and Inclusion Committee and I are excited to host today's Google Chat, and we're really pleased to have gotten such a talented group of media and diversity and inclusion professionals for today's conversation. United, not divided, communicating through a crisis. Finding the right tone, as you know, and timing for communicating on a topic that's important to one segment of your audience without alienating the other can be a diversity and inclusion nightmare. I know we all have been there, but today we'll be discussing what to keep in mind as you find that right balance. We'll use communications that executives at companies like LinkedIn, Apple, eBay, Starbucks sent out to their employees after the recent US presidential election as case studies of how to emphasize on the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion with these types of communications. Without further ado, let me introduce our moderator for today's conversation, founder and CEO of Inclusion Ventures, Amy Lazarus. Inclusion Ventures creates best-in-class learning experiences to help organizations take an inclusive approach to diversity, inclusion, and leadership. It's because of that work that Amy is the best person to lead this conversation. And with that said, and my apologies for starting late, welcome, Amy. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Ayele and the team for this opportunity. This is such a timely topic, and we have an amazing group of esteemed guests who can share their expertise and really hopefully help you take home some tangible things that you can apply in real time and be further equipped to be able to communicate even more inclusively and effectively than you already are. So I am going to invite each member of this esteemed group to introduce themselves. We'd love to know who you are, what's your name, what's your role, your organization, and something about you that we can't find online. So you can start with Mandela.
Oh gosh, I was thinking about that last question.
Or something that would surprise us about you.
That's okay. My name is Mandela Schumacher Hodge. I'm the Portfolio Services Director at K4 Capital, a seed stage venture capital firm based out in Oakland, California. One thing that you can't find out about me on the internet, I don't know because I'm very public, but I guess I would say when I was 10 years old, I was on the evening news as a weather girl, and I completely froze on camera. So that was my first experience with public speaking. And as you can see, I've gotten much better.
You have. If you freeze today, we'll help you out.
Okay.
Thanks. Juanita?
Hi, everyone. My name is Juanita Leveroni. I'm the Diversity Partnerships Manager at Code 2040. We're a nonprofit org. We focus on supporting our Black and Latinx computer scientists and entrepreneurs in thriving in the innovation sector. One thing, I'm actually pretty private, so hopefully there's a lot that you can't find out about me online. I would say I'm a huge geek about nature documentaries. They just make my heart happy. River monsters, no?
Jarrett?
Hi, my name is Jared Hill. I am a journalist. I contribute for The Hollywood Reporter, just started contributing for The New York Times and a few other outlets. And I host a podcast called Back to Reality, where we focus on the intersections of politics and pop culture. I do that with NBC BLK, and we're actually going to be live from 30 Rock today, which will be very exciting. And the thing that you would not know about me from the internet, the first job I ever had, like paying job, was working at the Jelly Belly factory making chocolate confections. And I was fired because I was bad. So there's that.
Jared, I am a member of the Jelly Belly Club. We'll have to talk about it.
Really?
Yeah, you two can join for like $10.99.
Jelly Belly is headquartered in my hometown of Fairfield.
Yes, field trip for all of us in Northern California, but I digress. Jared, what is something that we could find about you online? You have a recent claim to fame.
I, you may, if you know my name or my face, it may be from this crazy little tweet that I wrote that called out Melania Trump for plagiarizing Michelle Obama at the Republican National Convention in July. And that's kind of as it wasn't before, so.
Great, thank you. So as Ayala laid out so clearly for us, this is a timely and important and challenging topic. How do you ensure that your internal communications align for your employees? How do you ensure that your external communications align? Who is your audience? Who has voice? Who doesn't have voice? How do you craft your message? And how can you be inclusive in your communication even when you disagree? How can you really speak to everyone so that everyone in your company and all of your stakeholders feel included, feel part of the conversation, and don't feel alienated? Because we know the ramifications and what happens for morale and for engagement and for the business if not everyone is able to show up as their authentic selves. So that's what we're focusing on today, all those elements. We're asking everyone to take part in this fruitful discussion by using the hashtag PRDiversity and hashtag diversity PRSA-SF to ask questions and post comments. Ayala and her team will be compiling those, and we'll get to the questions at the end of our conversation. So please do chime in with what you want to learn. So to get us started here, when we look back on the communications that companies like LinkedIn, eBay, Apple, and Starbucks sent after the presidential election, what do you think that they got right, and what were some missed opportunities? It's open to anyone.
I would say, and I'm thinking specifically of the LinkedIn letter, I think it's incredibly powerful to bring in the personal experiences, not just of yourself, but of your employees. And the way in which he was able to actually give color and paint the picture of the different feelings and the different emotions and hardships that the LinkedIn employees were going through I think is incredibly, incredibly important, not just in empathizing, but in being able to really show others experiences they, because of a different identity, may not necessarily be going through themselves.
Great. So empathy and first person narrative. Yeah.
I actually wholeheartedly agree with that. I really thought the LinkedIn letter did a great job of being able to depict how it wasn't just like, I feel this way or the company feels this way. It was, anecdotal, and it included information from various different people. I did think, though, the LinkedIn letter missed the opportunity to reach out to the employees that were actually Trump supporters. There was no language in there that said, if you voted for Donald Trump or if you align with his views, there's space for you here. Not that I'm a Trump supporter or that I felt left out of that narrative, but I could see how someone that was a Trump supporter, excluded from that part of the conversation. But I thought he did a really great job of including first and third person narratives to say, like, this is what people have said to me, this is what I hear that you're feeling, and this is how I'm responding to that.
Yeah. Did anyone see the Randall Stephenson video, the speech, the AT&T CEO?
So powerful.
I watched it again this morning before this call, and it hit me the same way it did the first time I saw it. And I think so much of what resonated with me personally was that he literally said, if we're going to have this conversation here, it starts with me, the CEO. And I think he modeled a lot of vulnerability in talking about what he wasn't aware of and how he went through his own personal journey of a rising consciousness, right? Like taking the time to learn from his friends' experiences, etc. And there were parts of his lack of knowledge that he was ashamed of, and he talked openly about that. Because I think so much of this narrative is about like shaming people and for not knowing what they should know. And I think the fact that he was a white man of a CEO, a global company that's doing very successful, that he was able to model his own lack of awareness for the ERGs that he was speaking to. You could just hear from the crowd how it was showing the humanity of the experience that everybody was grappling with as they're trying to figure out how to talk to each other and how to come across the line.
Thanks.
And I also think the importance of that is like the vulnerability, right? To say like, there are things I don't know. There are things I'm not aware of. Like, please bring these things to my attention. There's a great meme online right now that says, if I get something wrong, don't shame me, educate me. And I think that speaks exactly to what you're saying, Mandela. Like, it's important to be able to say, I don't know everything, but I'm open and I'm willing to hear. So, and
where's the balance of, come educate me, but then how do we ensure that the educating isn't put on people of color or traditionally marginalized groups to always have to do the educating? And so how might there be a role for communications professionals to help with some of that can also be educating larger stakeholders? I realize that some PR professionals also might be traditionally marginalized or people of color, but can you leverage your foundation and megaphone for that? Mandela, you wrote a piece in the wake of the Black murders last summer. You wrote a piece called "My White Boss Talked About Race in America, and This Is What Happened." What can company leaders and comms and PR professionals learn from that piece?
Well, I think the fact that I could have a title just saying "My White Boss Talked About Race in America, and This Is What Happened," and so many people opened it and read it and clicked on, like, speaks volumes that this doesn't happen enough, right? Yeah. So I intentionally chose that title because I knew that it would be something like, oh my gosh, like, what did she say? What was her reaction? And I think when I think back to that post I wrote, I literally wrote it in the middle of the night. I was so emotional about what was going on, but I was also reflecting on two conversations I had. One was with my white boss, who I work with right now, who acknowledged the killing of Philando Castile, who acknowledged the killing of Alton Sterling, right? Who asked me how I was doing, right? Am I okay? And then later on at dinner, my friend who was flying in from New York, who's a PR professional, works at a PR firm down there in Manhattan, and she was telling me how her CEO didn't say anything, no one said anything. And it just hit me about the experience I had to actually just be acknowledged for what me and my community were experiencing, and how I had never had that before. I've been in tech now for 6 years. My last company, I was by far a minority as a woman. You know, women in tech are 30% of the workforce. African Americans, like, the average is 5%. And then you talk about Black women, that's like less than 2%, right? And so the everyday experiences we have at kind of like suppressing, or, like, to use your word, our authentic selves, and having to check ourselves at the door and check our experiences on our community's grievances, it is a regular thing. And to not have to do that for the first time ever was just transformative for me. So long story short, I wrote a piece in the middle of the night about just what that meant to me. To be acknowledged. And then I laid out some of the points about self-educating yourself. I talked about seeking advice and help. I talked about taking action, right? My biggest problem sometimes with Silicon Valley and tech is that it's the total premise and the total basis for this industry's success is based off of, like, this growth mindset of being able to figure it out, and maybe not knowing it now, but having the drive and the will and the self-belief to get it done. And that mindset, like, goes out the window all the time when it comes to D&I. Like, oh, it's too hard. Like, I don't know what to do. No, you have the skill set. You have the mindset. Apply it to this area. And so I also talked about introspection and, right, really taking a look at yourself and your own self-awareness about what you know, what you don't know, the perspectives maybe you are exposed to and you aren't exposed to. So again, I wrote this piece, and what it showed me by its popularity, like within the first 2 weeks, over 500,000 people had read it and shared it. At LinkedIn, they were circulating. The CEO was talking about it. It got republished, like, all over. And I was reflecting, and I was like, well, what does this show us? It shows us that, number one, I think so many other people who are in positions where they're a minority in the workplace feel this way. And then I think another thing that it showed me was that so many people who are in positions of the majority don't know that people feel this way, because I had so many people, even my old colleagues, reach out to me expressing apology, like, I didn't know, I should have said something, etc. And then third, it created a lot of debate, a debate around where do you draw the line between bringing your whole self to work versus, you know, leaving some of your personal values and that stuff at home and not bring it. So there was a whole lot of discussion in the comment section.
Great, thanks. We've talked a bit about the CEOs that have done this well. Clearly, you know, Frida, Mandela's boss, and LinkedIn and Apple, the great messages. Juanita, when you don't send a message, when companies decide to not be public about any of this, what are you implicitly saying? When is it okay to not acknowledge an incident?
Yeah, I think Mandela spoke to this beautifully as well. When you're not acknowledging an incident, when you're not acknowledging an impact, you're not acknowledging the experience. You know, at best, you're minimizing the experience. At worst, you're just continuing and contributing to the silencing of a certain experience. So it's incredibly important, and the theme I'm hearing here is vulnerability, which I would just amplify right now too. You know, in our experience with the managers, the supervisors of our Black and Latinx interns, some of the things we came across is that the managers weren't bringing, it's not that they weren't bringing up the topics, such as the killings, because they didn't want to. It was they just were unsure. They didn't know if they were going to be tokenizing their direct report by bringing it up to the one Black male, right? So there's also a lot of fear there of making mistakes. And I think it's incredibly important, first, right, to actually acknowledge it. And in acknowledging, don't demand perfection of yourself. Race is an incredibly polarizing and can be a very uncomfortable topic, especially for those who aren't forced to think about race every day. And so giving yourself grace as you acknowledge this, recognizing that it's going to be uncomfortable, and that is absolutely fine, but it's the effort in and of itself and the humility with which you bring the acknowledgement that I would say are the two most important pieces.
Great, thanks.
Can I piggyback on that for a second? I totally am with you, Juanita, and I think it's also important for executives and people that are in leadership positions to also be aware that when you're going to, you know, a minority person or dealing with minority groups, there are some people within community that answering your questions and helping to educate you and inform you on different things, and there are some people who are not. And there are a lot of people who feel like it is not my job to educate you. It is not the work that I am tasked with doing to be your Google or, you know, to be your class. And that's okay as well. But there are people that will also say, what is your question? How can I help you? How can I be a part of this? So I would people in these leadership positions that you will probably receive responses on both sides, but the vulnerability and openness of being able to say, hey, I don't know these things, or, you know, this is the place where I'm having trouble. I think that there's great value in that, and being able to say, like, this is the truth and I'm trying to do better. How can I do that?
Yep, I would have people of color and underrepresented staff members, incredibly important to point out that they are not the chief diversity officers of your organization. They do not play that dual role unless you're paying them specifically for that. So like Jared said, just being really mindful of that and not expecting education.
Just as asked, who do you most admire in leadership and inclusion and technology? And I said, all the people who don't have diversity or inclusion in their job title and yet are doing this work every moment, right? What that looks like.
I think that's super important. I mean, when you only see people of color or, you know, minority groups in D&I positions, it kind of speaks to the tone of the environment that you probably are walking in. I think it's also important to remember, like, this does also start at the top. So, like, part of the cultural competence, if you will, is about having people around said leadership that do not all look exactly like him or her. If it's a room full of executives and they're all white men, there's not going to be a lot of perspective that can, you know, come from other places to be able to inform those discussions. So it's not solely about this kind of a letter that you might send out or this kind of messaging, but it's about the culture and the competency that comes from having a real diversity and real inclusion. Recognizing diversity and inclusion are two different things, right? Like we see them put together a lot, but they're not the same, but they're both so important.
Definitely. Have any of you seen examples of a time when people did not incorporate perspectives of some of their, you know, the different elements of diversity in their employees? What happened when certain perspectives weren't included or weren't asked before a communications message went out? No.
Everyone's done it perfectly.
We have diplomats on our panel today. Good.
I do more writing and journalism, so I don't always end up analyzing those messages in the same way, really, until we started having this discussion. So, person to answer that one.
Right.
So I'll give you one example. And again, it's not in the tone of like a public facing letter, but it is something internally. Like as portfolio services director at K4 Capital, I work with 118 different tech startups of a variety of sizes, from 2 to 5 person companies to like hundreds of people and employees. And so one incident in particular was a founder, again, well-meaning founder, and they were talking about their cultural values and their norms and their code of conduct, et cetera, at a meeting within their internal team. And the founder themselves always thought the word meritocracy and having that stated as a value is something that everyone just bought into. But everyone has different opinions about meritocracy. And this was a white man who, again, had certain lived experiences where his definition of meritocracy aligned to his experiences. And so what ended up happening was, as his company grew and he, again, was having this conversation with a new set of employees that weren't there at the founding of the company, when he put this in the value, really called him out on it, and he kind of just froze. His story to us was he froze in front of everybody. He didn't think that people would be opposed to it, nor was he prepared to respond to the opposition. And so what we ended up doing was we came in and we facilitated a discussion between all the groups, but it was a real learning moment for the founder, and they continued to just tell us the impact that conversation had thereafter on his thinking about making sure that his personal worldview is not the one that is dictating how he's setting up his company, but that he's really incorporating new voices into the development of some of the core foundational pieces of the culture.
Great. And that worldview, how do you see the world? How do the people advising you see the world? How do you not see the world? And inherently in there, how does that affect what you're producing, whether it's your communications or your culture or your widgets and products and services?
Mm-hmm.
We've given examples of companies that, again, have taken the lead on this. If your company is late to the party on a post-election message or on a post-Orlando Pulse message, is being late better than silence? What does that look like in terms of the sequencing of when to or when not to say something?
That's an easy one for me. Absolutely. No doubt about that one. And again, going back to the vulnerability piece, if you're able to put something out, even if it's 2 months later, you're still acknowledging it, and just be humble and honest and candid about, what was it in your process? What was it in the thinking of the leadership that, made it take an extra 2 months to actually put this message out? And how are you going to incorporate those lessons for future situations, right? So that your staff, your consumer base is feeling heard and valued by you. So absolutely, better late than never, with the additional component of real candor and humility as to why it might have taken you longer.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think so much of the letters I've seen out there are kind of like these shells, and then they plop in their name, they plop in their company's name, they plop in their little, different messaging, and it comes off inauthentic. And I think we talk about vulnerability, we talk about authenticity, but people can smell BS a mile away, right? Like, let's be honest here. People can smell it a mile away. And I think so much of what the trends we've been seeing is firefighting versus true leadership. Being proactive about really understanding your employees' lived experiences, understanding your customers' lived experiences, understanding the changing demographics of the country, like doing your homework, like in your, not even in your free time, but making that a core part of your job. Like I always say, business is people. And if you can master people, you can master business. And you need to understand that the people who are working for you have different values, have different backgrounds, have different preferences. And it's your job as a CEO to really understand who's working for you and also who's buying from you. So I don't know, I would just really shift and encourage CEOs and founders and even communications team to be more proactive in their approach. And, when you stay ready, you don't got to get ready.
I mean, much better use of your budget to spend it on the front end, on initiatives, on, like Mandela said, investing resources even within your staff, as opposed to just spending it all towards PR once shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
I agree with both of them. I mean, there's nothing else I could say. Those answers are like awesome. So
Great. Drop the mic. How have you all seen the internet and social media change how to address a crisis?
I would say we were talking about internal and external communications. I don't really believe that there's a such thing as internal communications anymore. I mean, obviously, there's certainly messaging that is tailored toward employees, or we are working on X. But in the age of social media, where everyone has a camera, everyone has a Twitter, a Facebook, like, there is no messaging that should be going out to your internal community that could not be seen by external communities. I mean, we've seen that all throughout politics with emails, and we've seen it through, people tweeting things that my boss just said X or whatever it is. I don't believe that there should be a real difference in the messaging that goes in internal and external. And also, because the bigger your company is, the more people that you need to consider their perspectives when looking at, how you're addressing people in that messaging. So I don't believe that there should be a distinction between the two.
I think, I think two things really have changed. I think that employees don't necessarily tell companies or HR departments what's wrong anymore. Like, my boss, Dr. Frida K. Borkline, always says, like, Medium, the blogging platform, is like the new complaint channel for employees, right? And so they're not telling the employer anymore necessarily what's wrong, or they don't trust the employer to actually do something about it, right? So they're opening up their lived experiences in the workplace to the public, and the public is the judge, right? And we see this play out in so much lately. But I think it's really interesting, and I think that with platforms like Glassdoor, there's just so much more transparency and accountability in relation to employee experiences in the workplace. I actually think it is one of the most, I don't want to say challenging, but it is a unique time to be a founder of a company, because you really need to be aware of what the temperament of your employees are and of your customers are, to make sure that, again, they don't turn to one of these other blogging platforms as a complaint channel, and that you've really taken the time, being proactive and a great leader, not a firefighter, to build a culture where people feel welcome to speak up. They don't just feel like they are, to use Jared's point about diversity inclusion, they don't feel like they're just invited to the party, but they're actually asked to dance, right? Inclusion, welcoming, belonging. But yeah, it's changed so many things.
The level of accountability. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Juanita.
I was just going to say with what you're saying too about, in this day and age, anything is possible in terms of going viral. So there is the level of transparency that whether or not founders like it, they're going to get it. And there's also the increased level of accountability. As Jared said, whatever you're putting out internally, it's going to be something that external voices are going to see as well and are going to hold you to. I'll add one other really positive thing about social media. We were talking about education. Especially if you're a white male CEO, go on Black Twitter during these instances. Go and read about the different experiences. I mean, Black Twitter can break the platform. And that in and of itself is a very easy, accessible way to be looking at the perspectives of different people.
Yeah, and can I just say one more thing, because this one really gets under my skin a little bit about social media and everything. So many companies I know, and even I've worked for in the past, will hire very inexperienced people to be social media account managers, community engagement managers. Like, these are historically, it's been around for like 5 years, but these are very entry level positions. And I think if anything we've learned from what's been happening as companies are forced to respond to things they're seeing on social media or from employees, is that you really need to invest in and train up great communications, social media, PR teams. This is not like a little job. This is a hugely important aspect of the imaging of the company. And I just think that so many times they just kind of handed it off to this recent college grad. Nothing wrong with the recent college grad, but just to have some, awareness of like the weight of that role of being the voice of the company.
I cannot agree with you more on that. Just seconding that, like I work in news, and I feel like the news industry, especially with local news, has done such a terrible job of figuring out how to embrace social media. Without going into specifics, I worked at one company on a way to a conference with all the other news directors and came back saying, we're going to be digital first. We're digital, and then laid off all their digital producers. And it showed that there was a lack of understanding on direction and focus. I also wanted to touch on Mandela's first answer to this question. If you are seeing your employee going to places like Medium or Huffington Post or whatever to write pieces about, D&I or whatever it is, that is a #1 red flag that you are probably not handling D&I in a way that makes them feel comfortable to come and say, hey, this is a challenge that I'm having. I had this experience with my boss. One of my coworkers did X. There was a weird conversation. People having to go and write online sometimes, that might be an indicator that there's not an open space. But then again, we have Mandela, who wrote her fantastic piece because it was so good. So, but people are going to complain online.
It's true. We'll be going to Q&A in a few minutes, so make sure to get those questions in with hashtag PR diversity and hashtag diversity PRSA-SF. We already have some great questions coming in, so make sure to get in the queue if you want your question asked. And Jarrett, we just lost your video, just so you know. Okay, we're talking about the messages, and it seems like in the past few months there's been kind of one crisis after another. And so a lot of my clients will say, well, if we say something and come out publicly about this, then we'll have to do it again the next day. We'll have to do it again a week later. There's this shooting, there's this ban, there's this thing for every single incident. And it's a slippery slope, they'll say. What do you say? How do you advise your founders? How do you advise the communications folks to work with the CEOs around when is there a slippery slope, or when do you take a stand?
I don't know. I really think a lot of it comes down to your personal values and where you fall on the spectrum of being willing to bring your personal values into the workplace as the CEO. Because as the CEO, you set the tone, you set the culture. So if you are yourself modeling that, so for instance, I am an African-American woman and I'm the CEO of this company, but when I come into work, right, I never talk about any of my African-American experiences, never talk about the fact or call out that I'm a woman, right? That's modeling for everybody else in the company that this is not a place that we have those conversations. It's all business. But if you're a founder where you're willing to talk about your experiences, talk about your values, I really feel like you create a culture and you create a PR team and you create a way of reacting to the things that are going to continue to happen in the world. But it's grounded in a knowing of who you are and what you stand for. And so I just feel like people are at different ends of that spectrum, and the founders and the people who are looking to work at companies need to decide, like, is this a place that allows that this founder is modeling, they bring in their values, I align to those values. But I don't know, I just think, life is gonna happen, right? Stuff happens to all of us. I forgot we were live.
I swore earlier, it's okay.
Stuff is gonna happen. Crises are gonna continue to come up, right? Like who are you? What do you stand for? Who is this business, right? Like, and some of it, you're gonna lose some people, right? Because not everybody's aligned to that. But you have to decide for yourself, like, where you stand. And I feel like because of where I'm at right now, K4 Capital, K4 Center, LPFI, like, we have founders who are so grounded in their values that when we receive crises, like, our response is always grounded in the knowing of who we are and that we've already made this decision. This is what we stand for.
Also, communication, as in, the way we're talking about it here, where it's actually like a letter, right, from an executive to staff. that should not be your go-to. That should not be your main way of showing your employees that you value them and you're empathizing with them and you're understanding that they may be having a very difficult experience in this moment in time. If that's your concern, that I'm putting out too many letters because too many, bad things are happening, that to me is signals that there just aren't enough. There's not enough proactiveness. There aren't any other spaces, is essentially what we're saying, within the organization, within the company, for your employees to be able to talk about this, for your CEO to be able to demonstrate their investment in this, to be able to put resources forth towards that. So even if you're doing like a very easy example of this is, a bi-weekly or monthly diversity town hall, or, you know what I mean? And it gives a regular space, especially where we're at right now, in terms of the contentious political climate. It gives a recurring space and for the employees to be able to process, for the CEO, the executives be able to speak and explicitly say why they're invested in this, or what they want to learn about, or where their areas of growth are, or how they can support their employees. Sending a letter isn't going to be enough. It's a small part of the bigger strategy.
And that really gets at the ampersand that Jarrett was talking about, of having the inclusion space, another container release valve to hear voices, have people know that they're valued. They don't have to go to Medium. Here's a space to come and talk about this and be bold and be brave and speak truth to power. You can disagree with the CEO, et cetera. Yeah. Jarrett, anything else to add before we go to questions?
I'm good.
All right, so we have a question coming in here from Corey Harris. What are the top 3 crises that any company across industries should plan for? So this goes to Mandela's point about be proactive, not a firefighter. What can folks plan for?
What are folks plan for? Let me look into my crystal ball.
Right here. There's a
Please
Samsung
go there.
sitting right here about firefighting and crises. I'm not going to touch it though. I'm not going to do it.
No, it doesn't sound like you're touching it at all.
Go ahead, Mandela. I'm sorry.
No, I was hoping you could answer, Juanita. I don't know. Again, like I said, I have the luxury of being not in one company, but across all these different companies. And I'm trying to think of some of the major themes that come up.
If I could maybe help you out here, I think that kind of depends on what the business is, right? The crisis for Samsung is very different than a crisis for, I was going to say Apple, and that would actually be completely wrong. A crisis for Samsung is going to be very different than a crisis for Whole Foods, right? And so I think it really is about what are the major things that can go wrong within your business. If I'm at Whole Foods, I'm thinking about food recalls and learning about the fresh farmer, the local farmers that we're working with and things like that. Whereas if I'm at Samsung, I'm looking at our phones could the fun of Samsung just because I'm an Apple person, but it is what it is. But our phones we're having problems with our batteries, or there's a problem with our screens, or different things like that. So I think it really kind of depends on what are the major tones of conversation or major offerings that come from your company that can really help to answer what those major crises are that you should be aware of in a proactive way, as opposed to in a firefighting way, as Mandela put it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mandela. I would totally agree with that. And I'm trying to, as I'm listening to you, Jarrett, I'm also trying to rationalize really quickly, why is this hard for me to answer? And I was thinking, well, I think just the framing of even the question, what crises should we look out for, is a totally deficit, negative mindset of a way of going about it. And I think that we try, and the way I try to kind of coach the companies is what do you envision for your company? What do you want to happen? Not what do you want to happen, and focus all this energy on fighting these negative things that may or may not happen, instead of channeling your energy and your attention and your efforts towards building the type of company that you want, right? I want this type of company where these types of people, hopefully all types of people from different ability levels and backgrounds, races, ethnicities, origins, language, feel welcome there, right? Like, and then what does it take to build that type of company, right? Because I feel like if you do that, and if that's your model and your ethos of your company, then I feel like, you know, consequently, you know, you probably won't be dealing with as much crises as we see these larger companies who decided to postpone D&I until Jesse Jackson came knocking on their door to release their numbers. And now they're like, oh, you know, I won't curse, oh mess. You know, what are we going to do about this, right? So I don't know. It's just a different way of thinking about it. I would encourage we kind of change how we're talking about it.
So instead of, oh, go ahead, Juanita.
I was just going to add, I think too, maybe a simple way to look at it too is be prepared for things that can be, you know, directly harmful and polarizing to both your staff and your consumer base. And what that means for companies in the United States, where we're a changing demographic, where, you know, by 2040 or within that decade, where we're looking at a population majority people of color, that means each and every company in the United States needs to be prepared to have a difficult conversation about race, needs to be prepared about, you know, Black Lives Matter coming up. And simply because that's who should be represented and will be represented in both your consumer base and, though not now, should be represented in your staff as well. So that in and of itself is I think just one easy one. Prepare yourself on about conversations about race.
Great. And so I'm hearing there too, what is the role? Again, different companies, sometimes the communications and PR folks wear all the hats. And to make your jobs easier, how can you be proactive about working with the folks who are working on culture, who are working on engagement, who have D&I in their title, or, you know, the CEO and founder? What can you do to prevent having to look at it from a deficit perspective? But again, that culture that you envision, let's work together so that this can happen. And here's the communications around it too. It's not, we have to have a practice, you know, product recall, or if sexual harassment happens, here's what we'll say. It's let's get ready for our most amazing product launch. Let's get ready for this amazing conversation in town hall that we just had where everyone was engaged, and let's talk about that. We have one more question coming in here, and I have 30 seconds to answer it, everyone. So this is from Marquise. Another, let's see, who is in the chain of command for handling tough communications within a company?
The CEO.
Yep.
They set the culture.
I was waiting for it.
I would agree. I mean, I think especially when it's a difficult conversation, and especially if, you know, we're talking about a CEO that doesn't fall within one of the minorities that's being discussed, or that's you know, the topic of conversation, I think you have to start including more people that may not necessarily be in the E-suite, but that are people that, you know, represent the company's values, and saying, you know, how do we deal with this? Is this something that we need to discuss? Is this something that we need to bring up? How are we, you know, failing, and how can we improve? And help and have the team craft the message. I mean, the PR person may or may not be a person of color, or may not be, you know, aware from a D&I perspective, but I think you have to kind of get more voices in the room and have people take a look at it and say, you know, is this inclusive? Are we doing this well?
Yeah, great. Whose worldviews might we be missing? As we wind down here, last words of wisdom, or one thing that you want PR professionals to consider around united, not divided, communicating through a crisis.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest piece of advice I have is don't just show up for these conversations, and don't just show up, you know, when there's a meetup about D&I, or there's a Google Hangout about D&I. Like, who are you spending your Sunday brunch with, right? Like, who are you going to workout classes with? Are they people who are different from you, right? Like, are you really personally building your own diverse personal network? Because I truly believe that empathy is one of the biggest biggest factors in really pushing these conversations forward is taking the time to understand other people's lived experiences. And like research just shows, it totally increases pro-social helping behaviors amongst people. But so far, like we're all behind our own computer screen, right? And then we're gonna hang up here and then we're gonna go into our probably non-diverse workplaces and we're gonna talk to the same people we've been talking to. But again, I would just highly encourage people to get out of your comfort zone, meet people who are different from you, because then it'll increase your comfort and awareness in the workplace.
I would say, to piggyback on what Mandela was saying about, you know, understanding people's lived experiences, is do some of your own personal work on figuring out your own implicit biases and figuring out, like, what are your blind spots? Where is your cultural competency maybe lacking? And that's not an easy thing to do. It doesn't happen in an afternoon, you know, in a conference room. It takes a lot of work and a lot of strategy and just a lot of awareness. So I would say I just did a piece with for the New York Times with the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles, and they do a lot of work with companies and organizations and, you know, law enforcement and hospitals on, you know, inclusion and tolerance and implicit biases and things like that. So like, do that work, because it's one of those things that is easy to put off to next month, to next, you know, next summer. We'll do it, you know, in 2018, and then you have some kind of crisis show up, and it's like, oh, so you weren't paying attention to this, you didn't care about that. But I think the work is worth it.
I have so much to say, but I know we're negative 1 minute. So I'll just add a tactic to what Jarrett was saying around better understanding your privileges, better understanding the power you hold or the different experience you hold. One way I push my companies to do that is by really sitting down and spelling out what political, social, economic resources do you have at your disposal. And then at that point, you can look at different communities and see if each of these communities that are represented in your consumers and in your staff have equal access to these same resources that you don't. That's one easy way to, I mean, it's hard and that is reflective, but that's just one easy tactic to start to pull out what is accessible to you, what capital do you have that not everyone might have, and that changes experiences.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. We've learned a lot in such a short amount of time, from the themes of vulnerability, humility, and grace coming from the top and permeating down, who's identifying who's working for you and who's buying from you, and how to message and include for all worldviews and perspectives, how to be proactive, both strategically and then also tactically, what that looks like from a communications and diversity and inclusion perspective. I want to thank all of our remarkable panelists and all the participants. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you to Ayele and the PRSA team in San Francisco. We look forward to seeing all the wonderful messages and communications that you all produce in your companies and organizations. And feel free again to use the hashtag if you have further follow-up. We'll do our best to respond.
Thank you guys so much for participating. I really appreciate you and your patience today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.